I'm going to introduce Jael. She's my co-host for tonight, and my first time having a co-host. Happy to have her. She's been hosting a lot of spaces with artistic-minded folks in and around the tech space, so I thought it would be good to bring her on. But our main guest for today is Julian Ahlquist. And quick bio, Julian is a graduate of Christendom College with a double major in philosophy and theology. He's also founding faculty at the Chesterton Academy, which some of you might know about. He helped develop the history and philosophy programs there. But what we're really speaking about is a new project he's kind of started on his own, something of a hobby, but it looks like it's really been taken off. He was recently featured in Church Pop magazine. The project is called Generation of the Saints, and they create him and his co-creator, Father Sandquist. I think that's who it is. He'll speak more about it. But they create AI images of saints and other church figures, biblical scenes, and they post them on Reddit, on Instagram. They have a few accounts online. So a really neat project that he's been working on now. And so the topic for today is about religious artwork and AI. What are the compatibilities? How can we view AI artwork from a Christian perspective, and how ought we to be building these tools and using these things? So I'm curious to kind of hear his thoughts there. I know when the Church Pop interview went out, there was a lot of pushback. I think some people are kind of surprised by that. I'm not so surprised. I think there's been kind of an ongoing question about how suitable technology is within a Christian framework of understanding about who we are as humans, and how technology ought to fit into our lives for some time now. But definitely, I think if you go look at that original Church Pop tweet, you can see a lot of some of those fears pop up there. So happy to have Julian on to kind of speak to that, speak to what his intentions are and how he thinks that, he's using these tools in a proper, in a Christian manner. Last thing I want to say, and I'm not going to monologue here too long, but I do want to say that we've been having these spaces, these Twitter spaces on a topic I'm broadly calling Christian Futurism since the beginning of the year. We're focusing on questions about the intersection of tech and Christianity. So a lot of AI, some blockchain, virtual reality, these types of things, some really cool technology that's being developed here recently. And I think Christians need to be having a conversation and participating in that conversation. So that's why we're doing this. It's a pretty ecumenical conversation, meaning we have Catholics here, we have Protestants here. We're also happy to invite our Eastern Orthodox brothers and sisters when they make it out. But it's not an anything goes space, the way I look at it, we have a common belief in a Trinitarian God and our salvation through Jesus Christ. We often also have a common baptism, common confessions in the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed, and probably really important for this discussion, we have a common understanding of mankind as made in the image of God. We call that the Imago Dei. So I think some of these questions in this conversation is really going to feature on that concept of what it means to be the Imago Dei. All right, enough talking from me. Let me throw it to Julian to maybe kind of introduce what Generation of the Saints is all about. And also, if anybody wants to join the panel, please just raise your hand. Happy to invite people up.
All right, can you hear me?
Sure can. Go ahead.
All right, excellent. All right, well, thanks for having me on here. This is my first Twitter Space experience. I just learned about the existence of such a thing recently, so I don't know what's going on here. So yeah, just a little more intro. So me and Father Sandquist, he's a colleague of mine at Chesterton Academy. We were just at a brewery one day, and I randomly had seen a video of AI art. It was regarding DALL-E, that art generator creator, and I was just totally blown away. I showed him some samples, some experimental samples that people had come out, and he was blown away too. We both kind of immediately said, "Hey, this would be awesome if we could just create a bunch of saint images, just churn them out, and especially of Christ, of course, of Mary." And they're like, "Oh yes, that's such a great idea." So we began experimenting with DALL-E, and DALL-E wasn't that great. Eventually, Father Sandquist, he found Midjourney, and we began experimenting with that, and that was just that just hit the mark perfectly of what we wanted. And so I've been trying to create images of saints every day, more or less. I come out with like 10 images of a single saint per day on average or so. And I love doing it. It does take a long time to do. Overwhelmingly, I have positive feedback, and that's usually from on Reddit, which is where we're kind of centrally like doing our thing, as well as Instagram. So, and then I show a bunch, of course, of stuff in person to people. So overwhelmingly positive, but I definitely get a lot of negative feedback. I've gotten definitely some on Reddit. And then, yeah, when the Church Pop article came out, that on X, it was just, yeah, mostly negative, which was interesting. um, and, I hear that Twitter kind of brings out the worst in people sometimes because they have to be blunt with their short, tweets. And maybe that's it. But yeah, but I do want to say mostly positive feedback. The, before the Church Pop article, I wrote an article in Gilbert magazine, which is dedicated to the Catholic author G.K. Chesterton, and my article was titled "Baptize this technology as fast as possible," because if good people don't use AI and only, let's say, atheists, perverts use AI, that's just going to make AI worse and worse in all sorts of ways. So if good people, if Christians start using AI, it's going to be trained in a better direction, right? And restore all things in Christ. If something can be used for good, it should be used for good. And a lot of people, even a lot of people have said like the saint images. At least many of the saint images I make inspire them, and it's definitely inspired me. It's inspired me to deepen my faith. And if that does good for people, which I think it is doing good for some people, then that's obviously good. Anyway, eventually my archdiocese came out with an article in their archdiocesan newspaper, and it was totally positive on the project we were doing on Generation of the Saints. And then, yeah, eventually that led to the Church Pop article, and that definitely has gotten the most flack because I guess, yeah, because the other articles didn't go to Twitter, didn't go to X. And I think there's just like a very loud, I think, minority on Twitter that hates AI art. So yeah, I've been interacting with a lot of critics even before I got onto Twitter, and so I've been trying to sort of catalog all the objections, all the possible objections, and I've narrowed it down to just a few. But I don't know. That's a little intro there. I don't know if anybody has any questions, and we can take this in a certain direction, or I could just keep on rambling.
I'll pop
Yeah,
in and I'll say, sorry, Connor, that I interrupted. I was going to say, I just checked out your page and you don't have that many pictures. You have like 4. I was like hoping to like scroll down and see like massive amounts of pictures, but there's
Are,
not
are,
too
are
many.
you are you on the Twitter or Reddit or the Instagram page?
Twitter, yeah, I just went on your Twitter
Oh
page.
yeah, I only have just a couple because I just got on Twitter like a week ago or something.
Yeah, I
So
see you have followers. It just like posted like check you out because like this is
yeah,
extremely cool. I was hoping to see like a big feed, but I'm sure in time there'll be more. But they're beautiful. I'm happy about what you're doing. I think it's really good.
oh thank you. Yeah, no, I definitely should have posted more before doing this Twitter space. Now that I think of it, but yeah, the main stuff is all on Reddit. That's the complete set. So if you search Generation of the Saints on Reddit, you'll get to the page. The Instagram stuff was kind of the best of sort of, but yeah, dang it, I should have put more on Twitter already. Whoops.
that's okay. I'll try to dig up. I posted a few myself. I'll try to share that to the jumbotron. But I think you should definitely add Twitter to your catalog,
Yeah, that's for
for a
sure.
full platform. Don't be put off by the negative comments. I think
No.
sometimes it just hits the algorithm in a certain way, so it's really hard to judge how that stuff works. But I think you would get some positive feedback here.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm more or less used to negative feedback on the internet. I've been like debating atheist nerds for like a decade and a half. So yeah, I can take it. Well, hopefully we'll see.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad Jael jumped in there. I was gonna say, Jael, I'll just let you pop in whenever you have questions, and I'm super happy to have you because I know Jael's been bringing on a lot of artists into questions about kind of this intersection of tech, and I think one of her recent features is down in the listeners. Is that Phi Architect?
Yeah, we had him on to talk recently. Yep.
Yeah, I was in that space and I really enjoyed his insights though. So again, if anybody wants to hop onto the panel, ask some questions, engage with conversation, please just raise your hand there and request to speak and be happy to bring you up. I did bring on a couple other people to join the discussion. Feldman, I know Feldman is an artist as well, so I'm sure she would have some insights there. And she's been around since the beginning, all the way back since January, since we've been doing this spaces. Glad to have you here, Feldman. And also my friend Ian, who was actually the one who introduced me to Julian's work way back in, about this time last year.
Yeah.
So we, Julian and I have done a on a old podcast I was contributing to, the Crypto Conversion podcast, actually, which is on the listener panel just so I can play music in space. We aren't doing that podcast here lately, but that was a cool episode, and we talked about kind of his project and why he's doing it. So if you guys want to get some more info, that might be a good episode to check out. But why don't I throw it to you, Ian? I know you really took an interest in Julian's work, and I think you also recently wrote an essay on kind of how Christians ought to be approaching AI artwork specifically. So I don't know, maybe you might be able to start us off with a good discussion.
Yeah, for sure. Julian, I was not surprised by the negative feedback because I've been kind of taking the heat here for a while.
Oh, yeah.
You really inspired me. I subscribe to the Chesterton Society magazine, and after I read your piece, I really got into making Old Testament art on Midjourney.
Oh, really?
I'd been complaining for years to kind of any artist who would listen about just the paucity of Old Testament quality Old Testament art. I mean, still, even though we've got this, renaissance of art being made with Midjourney, still to this day, you've got a ton of fantastic stories and characters from the Old Testament that there's really no high quality artistic depiction of on the internet.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So I wrote. Yeah, I've done a little bit of it, not nearly as much as you, but I wrote a piece about that, and I name dropped you at the outset in Ad Fontes, which is a Protestant journal that was in print actually a ways back, and then that was controversial enough that some people wrote follow-up pieces just to attack my piece that I'd written promoting AI art. And then, gosh, man, on your church pop thing, I got in there and was kind of responding to some of the comments that were kind of critical of the idea of AI art, and then other people were like QTing my comments and ratioing them, and it was so much of it was, as you indicated, just like completely unreasoning, just like vitriol and unsupported assertions. I mean, so I'd really be interested in hearing what you kind of think the Steelman argument against AI art is from a Christian perspective, because it's really hard to figure it out from the attacks. I mean, it's basically, I'd be pleasantly surprised if anyone who's kind of more critical of Christians using AI to make art showed up in this space, because as far as I can tell, there's really not much of an argument. It's just kind of assertions that it's demonic with no kind of philosophical or biblical support.
Yeah. So I'll try. So that's excellent to hear. That's great that my work had inspiration there. But so at the very least, I think I've distilled anti-AI objections down to 4. So I think the most frequent ones said is AI art is not art. Okay. Number 2, AI art looks bad. And then 3, AI art steals from other artists and whatnot. And then 4 is AI art is demonic. The demonic accusation was the most frequent one at first, but that one seems to have kind of fallen to the wayside. But I guess I'll try to steel man each of these. So AI art is not art because the art, and this kind of goes back to ancient Greek definitions, have to do with humans making something intentionally. And with AI art, the AI, the computer is not a human, and that's the thing making the art, and therefore AI art is not art. Now you could say like, well, even if it's not art, like, still is it good, right? But anyway, that's kind of the Steelman-ish of the first objection. And part of that is like, well, it doesn't take any skill to use to produce this on behalf of a human. The AI art looks bad, and I would definitely say probably most AI art is bad. You can definitely usually tell, I think, if unless you're very unfamiliar with it, usually tell if something's AI generated. At least that's my feeling, and I might be sure. So yeah, if you recognize, and I will say, like, when I see an image on the internet and I'm like, oh, that's AI generated, I'm kind of like, yeah, there's a sort of cheapness to it sometimes, and I do get the sense like, oh yeah, maybe AI art is just sort of cheap and bad, and whatever. In terms of, so AI art steals. So usually how an AI art generator works is that it scans, the internet or some other data. It's usually the internet in general. Scans images that are related to the prompt being inputted into it, and then creates an image based off those images. And a lot of times it scans copyrighted images, artists, work by artists without their permission, and then creates images from there. So you could say like, yeah, it's stealing other people's artwork. So that's a steal man for that. Then AI art is demonic. This is a tough one to steal, man. I guess some people have inputted certain things. I heard one person said that he inputted the St. Michael prayer into some sort of I don't know what it was. Maybe it was Midjourney or something, and then like it crashed for 3 days. So there's that, and also, oh yeah, some of the images might be drawing from I guess pornographic sources or simply demonic sources, and sometimes if you render an image and instead of a crucifix, it might, like, the character, the saint might have some weird symbol, and maybe that's demonic or something, and maybe it is demonic. In fact, there was one time amongst the tens of thousands of images I've generated. One time there was like a clearly like demonic figure in the background. But it could have been like, because, the devil was tempting the saint, and that's what it was. Anyway, so that's my best to steel man that one. I don't know. What do you think of those attempts to make those objections sound reasonable?
I think some of the points are maybe a little more interesting to converse on than others, but probably the more less interesting to me is the question about AI stealing artwork. I think that's somewhat misunderstood about how AI works. Nominus here is actually an AI dev. He could probably speak a little more to it. But broadly, I say that you got to understand, like, AI, it's trained on data. So there is data used in the training process. But as far as, and I know OpenAI, for example, Midjourney, maybe too, I'm not sure, is open to the internet. So there might still be an active process going on there. But for the most part, there's no artwork stored in like Midjourney's model. After it's trained, it pretty much operates totally independently based on the data that it's learned. So there's really so that's somewhat of a misunderstanding, I think. Is that true, Nominus? I mean, are they open to the internet now with newer models?
So, I wouldn't say that when you generate an AI art piece that it is directly stealing, because the complexity of the space of possible AI artworks is what we call O of k to the 10, which is like a huge complexity space of possibilities of AI art being generated, while the training data would be O to the n. And all that means is just there's one version of the training data, but the AI basically guesses in between each picture that it, learns about. And so I wouldn't say it's directly copying, but where the ethical issue would come in is basically when they're scraping for data when they're collecting data from the internet. Is it a YouTube video with a proprietary song, or, that's where the ethical issue comes in, and we saw like Mira from OpenAI said a while ago that that they do collect things that are open, that are openly on the internet. So,
Yeah, I think there still could be an ethical question about, about using, I guess, AI or other artwork in the training data. But I just was speaking mainly to the active process of it continuing to scrape data is not necessarily true. It's not true that, like, when you generate something through Midjourney, it's not true that it's I'm going to butcher this word. What is it? Amalgamation of other
Amalgamation.
artwork. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not a combination of other people's artwork. It really is something entirely new that the AI has generated
Yeah, it's
based on what it's been trained on.
transformative work, I believe,
Right.
is the legal definition. It's transformative rather than just copying. Yeah,
Right.
I think that's the term.
That's exactly
Yeah.
right.
And I would say, like, even if it's being influenced by copyrighted work without the artist's permission, in a sense, that's how art happens anyway. Like, artists look at other artwork, even when it's still copyrighted, and it's gonna definitely influence the artist anyway. And if they produce something that is obviously just a copy of another artist, well, then that's a problem. But if they're influenced by it, maybe influence in the style, maybe just influencing in the subject matter, that's okay, right? So just because AI like Midjourney or whatever could be influenced by work that's copyrighted, that's happening anyway on real or handcrafted art, in a sense. At least that's an argument.
Well, not only that, Julian, but I've definitely found when I'm using Midjourney, I get my best results if I tell Midjourney to make something in the style of a particular artist. I'll describe the scene and I'll say, do this in the style of Salvador Dali or Jacques Louis David or
Yes.
whoever I'm thinking of.
Yes,
That's
I
when
do
it
that all the
looks.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I guarantee I'm not the first lawyer to come to the conclusion that doing that is completely legally fine. Midjourney obviously talked to IP attorneys that told them it was completely permissible to do that. That's how
Right.
all art works. And so there's certainly no legal problem with being influenced by another artist when you're creating something, whether you're a human or an AI. And that example I just gave, where I'm just putting in, do it like Salvador Dali, that's even, the influence there is even more straightforward than if they just saw some Salvador Dali paintings in the training data and were influenced by them. So there's no legal question. And then the question is, if there's an ethical question that's non-legal, what is that ethical question? And now, I'm by the way I'm open to the idea that maybe we should create a new legal regime to offer some compensation to human artists when AI scrapes their work, and maybe we've got like a Spotify of the visual arts. But I think the ethical justification for that would have to be that we as a society want to promote and incentivize the arts. It would not be that people are getting stolen from anytime their art influences AI, because already influence is not ethically or legally.
Right. Yeah. Good points.
Yeah, like I said, I think that question, I guess the legal question, is probably one of the less interesting questions here. As far as whether or not AI is actually artwork. And then I think probably the extension of that, especially when we're generating religious artwork, the question is that really a proper use of a machine or a tool to create, this religious framework for us through the artwork that that is not maybe as directly connected to a human's creative effort as at one point. So I know you draw a distinction that you're not creating icons. That process is a little bit different. That's somewhat established, by church teachings. You're creating religious artwork. So maybe what are kind of the distinctions there that you draw?
Yeah, I mean, for in general, like there's the question of, again, is AI art actually art? And again, I do agree with kind of the Greek Aristotelian and Thomistic definition that art is something made by a human intentionally. Basically, there's different ways to put it. I think that's the most straightforward one, and that's very broad, right? But the to contrast that, there's things that nature creates, right, and that wouldn't be art. Or it's something that happens by accident, like if you trip suddenly, obviously that's not art. Now you could like elevate an accident into an art, like if you're painting something and then you just completely screw up or something and you're like, actually, ooh, that looks good, and you keep it, then that you elevate it to art because it becomes intentional sort of after the fact. So AI, it uses a sort of randomness, and so there's a sense of like it being an accident almost. But then if you decide to keep it, it becomes art. Now there's other ways that AI art requires human input to and thus fulfills the definition of art. So for example, obviously AI generators were created by humans, so that's kind of a big thing, a big factor of human input. And it continues to be trained by humans. It's obviously influenced by pre-existing human art. The prompts, of course, are put in by humans, which is kind of a big deal. And sometimes you have to be very clever with the prompts if it's not cooperating exactly. It's a human who gets to decide what images the generator to basically publish and show what images he wants that the generators have produced, and that can be a time-consuming process. And even if you want to keep an image, there's oftentimes, although less and less, there's mistakes like it messes up the freaking fingers. And you can try to tell the AI art generator to try that area again, or you just manually Photoshop, which I do all the time. So that obviously is a big human factor. And it is true that that some humans are better at creating AI art than others. And it is a time-consuming process, and part of it is just time. But it does require some sort of artistic eye to figure out what images to keep and how to modify and whatnot. A guy hired me who used Midjourney all the time, and he's like, you're better at this, and so he hired me to make some images. So it's not like, it doesn't require any work or doesn't require any skill whatsoever. So I think for those reasons, at the very least, AI art is art. Now, maybe the more like the faster and easier it gets, does it become less like art? Perhaps. I mean, I definitely would say that someone who manually, by hand paints a picture, that definitely requires more skill than a typical piece of AI art, and coming up, finding a good image for whatever subject using Midjourney definitely requires more skill. But technically, it does. There's enough human input for sure that it fulfills sort of the traditional definition of art. So, I don't know. Anybody's thoughts on that before I wrestle with the religious angle?
Just kind of as a point of order, I'll say, if somebody definitely wants to butt in here, you just want to raise your hand, I'm happy to kind of pass it around that way. But otherwise, as long as we're having a good discussion, I think we can all just kind of hop in as we feel led. On that point, I have some thoughts, but I'm going to throw it to Nominus because he did have his hand up.
Oh, it's all good. Jael didn't speak yet, so she can go ahead.
No, Nominus, you could go first. That's fine.
Okay. I think that the skill spectrum in AI art is probably going to be fairly similar to any art form, but we really just haven't seen people. We really don't have any way to understand what's a great piece of AI art right now, I think.
Yeah. One thing comes to mind on that topic. I think it's usefully comparable to CGI. Like oftentimes when we can tell, like in a movie, that they're using CGI, it's usually kind of cringy, unless it's like like Toy Story or something, right? But if it's supposed to look realistic or something, and we can tell, that's CGI, there's kind of like, whatever. And so if you can't tell that it's AI art and it looks like, a real painting or a real photo, that's at least one factor into what makes good AI art, I think. So it's making it like good AI art is not supposed to look like AI art, I think. I haven't thought about it too much, but that's something to consider.
I wonder I wonder if we could study what kind of things tip people off to the fact that it's AI art. 'Cause, obviously when there's like a human in the picture, you may have seen like the weird hands. It couldn't do hands for a while,
Yeah.
but like maybe more abstractly, like, I don't know, that's an art thing though. I would love to hear from, Will also. Will Anselm is down in the audience, and he's really knowledgeable on theology. I would love to hear his side when you get to the religious
He's
topic
actually
as
popped
well.
up onto the speaker panel, and something
And
else
I
about
have
Will. I
some.
know he's yeah.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
I have like I have some experiments that I did a while ago with regards to the AI art potentially being like demonic thing, and like it was just like emergent things, not things I intended, but I think that like when I was talking about how the whole possibility space of AI art or even a word model is so informationally dense that and we don't really know what's in it, and I actually think that demonic things could come from an AI, but they don't necessarily have to be, if that makes sense. Like, I don't think that demonic things come from an AI means it's necessarily completely demonic, because it depends on the person prompting it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, because definitely demons, at least theoretically, have the power to manipulate what's going on in the coding and whatnot. So absolutely, but you could say that's true about just about everything, right? Any like you could say, maybe when you're brushing your teeth, maybe there's something happening on the chemical level being manipulated by demons or something, to point out to a ridiculous example. So the basically in terms of how how you deal with like matters of exorcism is you need to generally first establish kind of beyond doubt that like demons are involved, and basically the chief factor is there an aversion an aversion to the divine, right? If you say like if you douse the person with holy water and they're without them even, knowing it, and, they kind of cringe. Okay, maybe they're possessed or something. So likewise, I would say like when you're inputting prompts, into Midjourney, for example, and, you're inputting the name of Jesus, like, is it freaking out? Some people claim that sometimes AI does freak out. I've really never seen that. But obviously, it creates beautiful images of Christ and Mary and the saints, very beautifully and no problem. So that's at least, some evidence that Midjourney at least isn't possessed by demons.
I
Let's
I
Yeah, go
have
ahead.
seen some aversion I've seen some aversion in a lot of different models, but I've also seen models basically confess the gospel.
Yeah.
So I, I prompted Midjourney, like you said, with this thing called, I don't know, it was just a phrase that I thought of, symbolic repentance, because I was in repentance for what I thought was, I realized that throughout my life, sometimes when I repented, I was only doing it like really symbolically, like, just like to do it, and, but not usually, but just like sometimes if I was really upset or something, I would just do that. But when I entered that into Midjourney, it gave a really definitely demonic image. And it makes sense though, because that is like, sin is demonic. So
Yeah.
like, and that was like, I wanted to understand that sin better so I could turn from it,
Oh yeah, right.
And
Yeah. Just because image just obviously depicts something demonic doesn't mean it's obviously evil, right?
there was
There's
also another experiment I did, where
Let's pass it
yeah,
around and then come back, Nominus. But I do want to quickly too, because I asked Julian this question about the difference between icons and religious imagery, and I'll just say, like, I understand that there's a set way in the church that icons ought to be developed and to come about. We're not talking about that process or necessarily, right? We're talking about just the use of Midjourney to generate religious artwork, or even just be used by Christians. So I do want to clarify that distinction. I'm kind of foreseeing that Will might want to comment on that specifically, but I want to throw it to Jael because she had a question, and then let's cede it to Will because I'm interested in some of his thoughts there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we're talking about creating AI art, but I also wanted to say that it's just a really great visualization tool. It's good to see the saints in a visual, not so much even if it's art, but just to have like a visual. If you have something in your head and you would like it to come out onto it, it's different to see it. And that's all I really wanted to say.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah, it was like seeing depictions of the saints definitely make it more real. And it's ironic because it's AI art, which is supposed to be fake, but definitely like I think about their lives more, especially in like their historical context, and it definitely humanizes the saints, and says like, hey, maybe I can actually become a saint too. They're not such a distant distant abstraction. They're incarnate, as it were. Yeah.
Yeah, and we kind of have a lack of religious imagery for a lot of these saints.
Oh,
I
yeah.
know I was super interested in the Desert Fathers some time ago, and I'm actually still working. I'm not a visual artist, so I felt somewhat unqualified to kind of prep this conversation. That's why I was kind of happy to bring on JL, who maybe has a little more of those connections. And also, I'm interested in what Will has to say because I know he's actually a medieval art historian, I believe. But I dabble with the arts. I've been a gigging musician for a number of years. I actually don't really do a whole lot of that anymore. But I'm kind of interested in more of those artistic questions about, what is legitimate art and what ought we to be glorifying about art as Christians. And I think sometimes people who aren't so artistic minded kind of miss the discussion, both the people who have critiques about it and who are positive about it. So I want to loop back to that, but yeah, let's throw it to Will.
Well, thank you, Connor, so much. And yeah, first and foremost, I am an art historian. I have about 6 or 7 jobs these days because I'm just rubbish at all of them. So I'm just hedging my bets because I'll probably get fired from all of them before too long. Diana is getting increasingly more unhappy with my work in progress with every space that we do. But certainly from this conversation is interesting from an art historical perspective because just from a raw art historical perspective, I'm a Catholic as well, first and foremost. But from a raw art historical perspective, it's important to recognize that the Academy, even from the beginning of the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, does not consider photography to be part of the history of art proper. We're not saying that it isn't artistic and that it's not creative, but it is really understood to exist in an entirely different context to the visual arts, which is to say, making things, doing things, mimesis, right, as has been understood and has been examined. It obviously forms an important role in the midst of how we look at art and how we look at even photographs of some certain works that have been destroyed now, which we've only seen as even some paintings by Raphael, which we only know what they look like because of descriptions in a couple of very bad Polaroid photographs. I would say that the next step is that AI is downstream from AI generated. Generative AI as it produces images is downstream from photography by virtue of the fact that it is even less bound up in the mimetic context of people making things and doing things. And as somebody asked the question, what is art? Well, the great Lord Clark, who wrote the series Civilization, he said, well, I'm often asked, what is art? What is culture? And he says, I can't tell you, even standing outside the Great West Door of Notre Dame Cathedral. All I can tell you is it's people making things and doing things. And by that he meant people making things and doing things themselves. Now, let's not be snobbish about this. It's important to recognize that people are making things and doing things when they are carefully calibrating certain prompts to generate the production of certain images in AI. I think that it's important that we don't sniff at the level of skill and intrigue. I think as Julian had mentioned, you can't just, make things up or whatever. But it is not creating anything that is new, that is entirely the work of human hands. Now, and there's also this whole context of art and icons and images not made by human hands. There's a whole thing of these miraculous apparitions of icons, especially in the East. But the question that I wrestle with, first and foremost, and I have a couple of other things to say, but I'll just leave it here. I'll land the plane with this for now, and I'm sure that we'll come back to some of the other points in a bit. The question that I have is, when somebody raised, is AI inherently demonic? Well, I mean, that's a question that I'm not going to get into right now, but what I would say is that there is the potential, we're already seeing at the moment, a very uncharitable and potentially problematic displacement of well-trained, careful, diligent artists and graphic designers who are Christians, who have been producing work and images for churches, for Christian content creators, who are all of a sudden being replaced by generative AI. And that is a decision. I think that whole issue is something that we need to think very carefully about. I'm not ruling on that in a final sense, but it is not. It's really important to consider. There's a difference between generating an image for a quick post or a blog or something to throw at the top of a tweet. That's one thing. But if you're going to then sell that or put it in your church or use it for a book cover, is a human losing out for something that humans are supposed to be cultivated and encouraged to do, the process of creating holy and venerable icons being entirely consistent for nearly 2,000 years. Natura naturans, this whole principle of not just the final product, but also the making of it, which is worthy and proper to the human condition of contemplating beauty, contemplating God, contemplating the saints, contemplating Christ, who is the visible image of the invisible God. That is a fair concern that I think I have at the moment. And with that, I'll land the plane, and I'm sure that a couple of points we'll come back to in a wee bit of time.
Yeah, no, you make some great points, and I've definitely heard people voice them, and I've voiced them too in my own head. So yeah, a couple things is I would say that, yeah, whenever a new technology comes about, it's going to basically put a lot of people out of work. But then, a lot of people then, those artisans oftentimes can then adapt to the new circumstances. Obviously, when metallurgy was invented, metalworking, that put a lot of stone knappers out of business. But hopefully, they adapted. But a lot of people says, well, metallurgy could lead to a lot of evil, which of course it did. And just because a new technology doesn't come about doesn't mean it's going to be all, smiles and rainbows, because, metal has, killed a lot of people. So yeah, I would say that manual, artists are maybe the best equipped to do AI art well because they have the artistic eye. And so I would encourage, traditional artists to embrace AI more than other people because I think they'll be the most successful and help AI art get even better. Optimistically, I would say they don't have to necessarily, go out of business because of this. I'd also say that, when recorded music came about, a lot of people were worried like, oh, people are not going to go to concerts anymore. That's going to throw a lot of musicians out of business because of that. But in fact, people went to concerts even more. So again, this is sort of an optimistic hope that with more AI art out there and even more people using AI art, there will actually be a greater appreciation for art, especially for art that, required a lot of manual work. And they'll be even more impressed by real paintings and like looking at actually the paint strokes and whatnot. And I know some people who have, I've certainly increased in my art appreciation because, I've studied different art styles because of this and everything. And so I'm just like much more artistically aware and of art history in general and stuff. And yeah, I've heard people when I've heard at least some people when they went into producing AI music, their appreciation of music in general increased because of that. So yeah, the more traditional handcrafted art might become a luxury item, and hopefully that'll actually keep a lot of artists in business because of that. Again, maybe that's not going to happen, but I hope it will happen. I think there's a precedent to reasonably hope that will happen.
May I just ask a quick supplementary to that, just very quickly, literally, which is, are you suggesting that, let's say, atelier trained artists in the classical tradition are the best placed to sit at a computer and type in generate such and such with such and such, holding such and such in the style of such and such? Is that have I understood correctly, and that's a realistic prospect of their ability? I'm not a criticism. I'm hoping I'm just trying to work out precisely what you've said.
Yeah. So are you asking that? Am I advocating, or am I saying like,
No, well,
well,
you said that these classically trained artists are the best placed people to create AI art on the basis of new technology coming in. But when you talk
yeah,
about the development from stone to metal, or even art in the age of mechanical reproduction, wonderful book by Ruskin, of course, about the Industrial Revolution and screen printing techniques and things like this, right? There's a bit of a difference between that, which still involves the manufacturing of a physical object, versus something that is on a screen and typed out. And I'm just trying to understand: is that the suggestion that if you're a world class portrait painter, that your future is that you're best placed to type out basically a set of prompts? Is that what you're saying?
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I would say no. I'm not saying it's going to be a whole. It should be a wholesale replacement of it. I think it's going to be some sort of combination of the traditional handcrafted art that that they'll do, but also at least have one foot in the AI art generation. And I'm not sure what it's going to look like, but it feels like there's some fusion of the two. And we kind of saw this with CGI, where CGI seemed to replace all practical effects, and it was almost sort of a laziness. And now a lot of movie studios are going back to practical effects to some degree. And I think there's going to be traditional artists. I think I'm not saying that like abandon, all your paintbrushes or whatever. I'm saying at least have one foot in the generative AI world. And I think, that will, again, not replace what you've been doing, but it will supplement, your work and not drive you out of business. Again, I'm not sure what it'll look like, but
So
just having one foot in that world would be good in many ways.
Sorry, Will, I think we were waiting for you to respond. I don't know if you wanted to
I
jump
no, I
back
think
was
in
just
though.
going to say just really quickly again, final supplementary, and then I'll be quiet for a bit. So, but what's the incentive there? And because I think we're looking at it's
I think
important
we
to.
need to think of this in a more continuous manner instead of necessarily declaring I think it will or it will be this category of person,
Um,
or like I think that experienced artists will undoubtedly have a vocabulary that no one else will have. And I've seen artists, real artists that make a living with it. They know things, they know associations between of history of art, techniques, all that. But there might also be another category of people who, there might be, like, every tool you use to make any type of art is going to produce novel things. Like when people started playing the guitar, it was hundreds of years before the latest techniques have come out. And, uh, I think there could be multiple categories, and it's more continuous, because as well there could be extremely famous artists that don't know how to read, like they could just do it intuitively. Or so that's just one end of a continuum there, but there could be a whole, so I think it's not necessarily most prudent to say that only experienced artists will be good at it, but I would say that they have a very strong start and would likely have more out of distribution level of vocabulary to be able to prompt these things, especially if we develop potentially ways of prompting that aren't in English. And Midjourney has some of those features.
I know Will's itching to respond, but I think I'm just going to say quickly, I think we ought to also consider what you were saying here, Will, about that this is putting people out of work because it's taking maybe some of these graphic design jobs that artists have kind of found to supplement their income. I think we really ought to think about what we're saying there, because of course we can understand that there's kind of a lineage of the way art was compensated, I guess you could say, in the past, especially within the church. We had a patronage model. Now we have a very commoditized model where artists are expected to somehow find mass appeal and find these odd jobs where they're basically, a cog in the wheel. You're trying to create artwork for very specific specifications. And I don't think that always lends itself well to true artwork that is glorifying man, glorifying God. I think that's somewhat concerning to think that the best we can say is that these great artists have to have kind of these menial jobs in order to support themselves. So I think we ought to kind of evaluate that in the conversation, and also the fact that there's a type of artist, there's a type of person who obviously respects a very specific tradition of generation, and that's great, but there's also a side to art that is in constant evolution. And I think there's something we all respect about artists that are always able to evolve with new paradigms, because art is like a conversation. And if you're not continuing in the conversation, if you want to stay, in the past, then at some point you lose a little bit of what it means to be an artist when you stop participating, in that cultural conversation. So I really don't expect artists or us to even respect so much as someone who's just sitting in front of their computer and prompting Midjourney. But I think there's ways that we can use these AI tools to help in the artistic process, whether it's generating for creative inspiration, or you're using pieces of the AI, or you're using the AI in complementary ways for our work. And I can give some examples about that, but I think we can imagine that there's probably a more complementary process that can kind of develop here. But let's continue the conversation, and I think people want to speak to you, Will. So I want to throw it to Tim because he had his hand up, and then Jack as well. But let's do that, Tim.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for hosting this space. I think these are important conversations. So, first and foremost, in this space, I am a Christian. First and foremost, and that's where I get my identity, you could say, and worth from. So I think that's fundamental. But I do speak from a context professionally, as a professional engineer and entrepreneur. And I think we have to just kind of rewinding the conversation back 30, 40 minutes ago, in terms of some of the dialogue and discourses between Will and Julian. I would caution us to ascribe that which is human to AI. AI is machine learning. LLMs are basically advanced statistical models whereby it outputs words or images that would most likely elicit a positive response to the prompter. That's what AI is. So, we should be careful to anthropomorphize, which is to say, ascribe human characteristics to LLMs and AI when basically it's a tool. Technology is a tool. And I did like, and I appreciated Julian and Will's points in regards to the rate at which technology replaces jobs. And unfortunately, speaking as an engineer and just understanding history and being like a avid student of history, let's say, that's been the case since the dawn of time. That's what technology does. Technology helps save time and therefore frees up time for people to do other things. And so there is an inherent element where technology is a tool and an affordance that allows us to have more comfort and time. Then, it unfortunately replaces people's jobs or makes it more difficult for them to continue on that specific specialized livelihood, let's say, right? And I think, regardless of whether you're religious or not, or a Christian, I think it's important to, for anyone that's like takes technology and entrepreneurship and business seriously is to, do our best in such a way that the rate at which we employ technology, in this case LLMs, the rate at which we employ technology, LLMs or automation, we can generalize that to like control and automation, like robotics. The rate at which we do that should be ethical, and we should understand that there will be people that and it's a very real problem that humans have wrestled with arguably since the dawn of time, which is what to do with people that have been replaced, right? When the invention of the gun, right, that's made a lot of hunters and gatherers, trappers, right, it put them out of a job, right? And I think, like, just looking at like human history, I think it's important to understand that humans need purpose, whether it be in their job, whether it be in their calling. We need purpose. And when their job, their calling, gets taken away or gets eroded, then that's a very real problem. And, there's no quick fix or easy solution. And, some people say, oh, well, what we can do is we can re-educate these people that got put out of a job. Well, I'm telling you, realistically, it's very difficult that, let's say, re-educate them if they're 50, 60 years old and they're a truck driver and they've done that and they've done well for themselves and can put bread on the table and provide for their families and whatnot. But, and I'll just land the plane here. It's just like, realistically, it's very hard. That's why we have sayings like you can't, teach an old dog a new trick, right? The older you get, generally speaking, we get set in our ways, right? And it's difficult. It's not impossible, but it's like very, very difficult. So it is a very real problem, and that's where, society, that's where government policy and things like that come into play. So, those would be some of my comments.
Yeah, I somewhat question, how useful it is to talk about AI as merely a tool. I do understand that, and I've used that argument before. But of course, it really is shaping the way, we live and we create. And so there's kind of a way that it speaks to us in the same way that we use it. And I'm willing to speak. I'm willing to listen, I guess, to to some of those concerns that people have about how useful these tools are. But getting back to the question that Will had, and he had to jump off to join a novena. He said he will be back though. About the jobs that are being displaced. I really would question like what was saying about like an artist's job getting displaced. If you're creating art, you're creating because you love, you have a passion for what you do. And to say that merely taking away some of these super menial jobs that we've developed, in modern society where you have to create an ad for Coca-Cola and now they're able to use AI and that puts you out of a job. Like, are you really an artist or are you just a graphic designer? I think there's got to be a distinction between what was saying there, and I don't think that people's appetite for good, beautiful art is in any way diminished by AI. So that's really, I guess, the where I come to the conversation from. Jack's had his hand up for a while, and I met Jack a few months back, and I know he has some really interesting thoughts here. So go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, thanks, Connor. I kind of agree with both you and Tim's take on the financial piece of it. I think, in the future, we may look back at the 20th century as this weird little blip where you had lots of people making money in art. But for most of history, I mean, even all the great artists of the past, they were all broke. They died broke. There really has not been much money in art. Yeah, and yet art's always been made. It will always be made. It just, the 20th century, this mass media environment just may be a kind of a blip. And so yeah, there's going to be a lot of realignment. I did want to briefly talk about the copyright issue. I'm personally like morally opposed to copyright, and one thing I would say is that the whole idea of intellectual property is not doesn't really come from natural law. It's a very kind of a constructed argument, and so I don't think it's we should feel bad about taking other people's work. I think I really you look back like how much copyright has actually really destroyed artistry. That song, "You Are My Sunshine, My Only Sunshine." Okay, that song, it was sung all over the South in these little hollers, and there was hundreds and hundreds of versions of that song because it was passed from person to person. So your uncle might add a verse, or all new verses, or all new music. There was infinite variations of that song, and then A.P. Carter from the Carter family comes in and figures out early 20th century, oh, I can get the copyright. So he made the version he likes, the music that he likes, and now all of those other versions have been basically destroyed because they can't be replicated. And so I think you see the same thing now with all of Tolkien and Lewis's works. Why can't that those are culture defining works. Why can't I go and make a knockoff of the Silmarillion or something in an AI version and tell those stories? Now those stories are controlled by basically corporate interests. So that's just a little take on the copyright issue. I think talking about AI, I think we can't. I notice there's a lot of Catholics in the room, so I'm sure a lot of you guys are very familiar with McLuhan's work. I mean, McLuhan's has really been the defining person for me in really understanding media and art. And I think he makes a couple observations that are really interesting. He talks about art as being people, art artists are people who see the present. And that most people looking in the rear view mirror. Most people kind of experience life in the past. And artists, they seem like they can look at the future, but it's just because they have a really intense awareness of the present. And I think that really applies to AI because AI is always looking at the past, right? It's just taking lots of past data, applying some mathematics to it, and generating something, but it's fundamentally backwards looking. And so I think people, we've all experimented with AR, and I think, I work a lot. I've written a lot of stuff in AI, and it doesn't produce most of the stuff it produces is kind of like meh. You really do have to work with the prompts, with the code to actually bring a human aspect to it. The stuff that it just generates off the rip is not that good. It's not that interesting. I think there is something to that. The human aspect is never going to go away when it comes to art. I think there's another big piece that McLuhan talks about with how, whenever a new medium comes out, human beings always try to take the old medium and stuff it in the new form. So, for instance, when radio came out, they took the old plays and they stuffed it into the radio format, right? Then when television came out, they just did the radio show, but they put a camera in front of them. And so now that we have this new medium of AI, what's happening right now is the first version of it is going to be people who are kind of using the old world mediums, photos and videos, and they're going to try to use AI to create these new things. But the artists who really define AI, the artists, and there's a huge opportunity, are going to be the ones who really understand it in a native way and really um, capture how AI can really create entirely new forms of art. Um, so, um, but I think McLuhan, in terms of understanding media, I mean, McLuhan is just absolutely a, um, a towering. He's completely changed all of my work in the last 3 or 4 years when I really understood his work. And then the only thing I would say is on the technical side of things, like someone mentioned earlier about how, him and his friend were doing Mid-Journey, and his friend asked him to do it because he understood prompting better. He understood how to use the tools. And I see right now, I work in AI every day, and there's tons of code. It's very, very technical once you get down into, beneath the prompting. So I think there's a whole world we're going to see the very, very technical things come out of it. And to really, the cutting edge AI art still requires a lot of technical finesse. And that's what so I don't know, I think that's all my thoughts.
I think it's interesting how you said it only looks backwards. That's a really good point. And then I wanted to also touch on the copyright thing. So we did a space recently with like Architect Older, and he had a lawyer there. And Ian, I was unaware, but like you're a lawyer, I guess. So AI art is not copyrightable. So that's correct, right?
I think that's the general consensus.
You guys think it should be able to, like, because if you're prompting it, and if you don't have, we were talking about like intellectual rights for like scraping data of other artists and even saying like produce this in the way of this artist. And I think like there's certain LLMs that you could like have the output and it'll pinpoint which aspects of the generated art came from what sources, it'll cite its sources for whatever it rendered from that influence. And I think that's interesting. I think going into the future, there will be more protections for artists and there will be copywriting for AI art, because like if you take a lot of time to prompt something, you are putting in work into it. And if you're putting in work into it to create something, I mean, I think you should be able to, but that's just my opinion. I don't know what you guys think.
I'll just say
I
on
think
the
Jack
legal
was
front,
disagreeing. Oh yeah, go ahead, Ian.
yeah, I'll just say on the legal front that I would not confidently make the statement AI art is not copyrightable. You could make arguments either way. There's no case law on this yet. I'm sure that someone who, let's say, used AI to help them write a novel, that AI obviously is influenced by other people's work. That person, is going to have the traditional intellectual property protections that a novelist would have, probably. I think that's a case where I think most
I've
lawyers would agree that the courts are going
I have a comment to add on the legal. The AI companies have already been watermarking their images, so that could be relevant to the copywriting issue.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they're anticipating
Like OpenAI has been doing it for DALL-E 3 since earlier this year.
favorable case law. Yeah. The only other quickly thing that I'll add here as far as artists profiting from their work. I mean, there is a long history. Obviously, during the Renaissance, there were individual artists who were spectacularly wealthy. But as far as kind of natural law and copyright protections, artists profiting from their work, I would just add that the Christian tradition, at least in Aquinas, does recognize a distinction between natural law and legitimate man-made law. I mean, it's not like all man-made law that is not natural law or required by natural law is illegitimate per se, right? I mean, we recognize it makes sense to have speed limits, but does the natural law require that the speed limit be, this particular number as opposed to 5 miles an hour higher or lower?
We recognize the government has some legitimate role for kind of determining that number, even though it's not required by natural law. And, I'd make a similar argument with intellectual property protections for artists. I would say, sure, yeah, ethically, maybe you don't have natural law protections here, but whether or not that's the case, there's probably still a legitimate role for the government in making sure that being an artist is a profitable vocation because we recognize a societal interest in promoting the arts.
You can
Yeah.
definitely calculate like an optimum for different systems, especially like we do it on the roads with our whatever algorithms they use now, but we could make optimal models based on the shapes of the roads. Yeah, I forgot how that related, but yeah.
Ian, I agree with you that there is the human-made law. So I don't think copyright law is necessarily immoral fundamentally. I think there is a space for that. I think I look at it more on a pragmatic level. Go in your basement and try to make some music just on your own. Go make some music and release it and try to make money off of it. Good luck, because the labels are going to say, "Oh well, in 1973, there was somebody who had a really similar beat to your music, and so you're going to have to pay up." And this is where the labels still control all of our cultural production. Because if you try to publish something on your own, you don't sign with one of the labels and basically buy into one of their cabals, their rackets, then you're not going to really be able to profit off of that work. And you see that. So now you have to sign on with YouTube. There's now already AI that's filtering music and deciding and allocating payments in various shady ways. So the problem is when it comes to how do you regulate this is it's going to end up being some kind of weird corporate government alliance that just ends up bringing more dominance and corporate control over, cultural production. So I don't see any hope that the government ends up coming up with laws that are really equitable. And so that's why I'm kind of just like, I'd rather just there not be any laws created about it.
I'm kind of curious whether the big moneymaker for AI art will even be the same art forms or mediums as human art right now. Like right now we go to view human art in museums and stuff, but the latest thing with diffusion models, which are the models behind image generators, if you're not familiar, they're using them to make real-time game engines that just generate basically whole open world games as you go. And so, yeah, I'm not really totally even convinced that we will look at AI art, the same as human art. And potentially that could mean that the expression of AI art, like in a game generation, like a diffusion model may generate an image that has some similarity to some artwork back in 1983, but, in its final expression, its actual use case, the way it's being employed, is actually like, in a game or in virtual reality or who knows, in like a dynamic interface or who knows. I think the possibilities are wide open, but we're already seeing that eggshell crack. And I don't know, I just made that up. But, with like game engines that can just generate whole worlds, and it might use a Van Gogh to, for a 0.0001% of its diffusion generation. But like the final product is like some of the coolest games we've ever played,
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's a very potent observation, that the old mediums are a photograph on a screen. The old mediums are a video that's created and then produced. The real power with AI is going to look like stuff that's super personalized to the individual. and that means it's going to look totally different. What I'm working on right now is basically like a Pokemon Go style immersive game in 3D reality, where you literally run around and solve different clues and do different activities, and it's all powered by AI, but it's in a totally different kind of medium. So I think you're thinking about the AI in the right way. It's going to create whole new categories.
Well, kind of on this topic then of how we're profiting off of AI, and maybe this will help throw it back to Julian. I don't know how much longer he has with us, so I don't want
I'm
him to
good.
get
I'm good,
lost in
Tim.
the. Okay, cool. Um, I would just be very cautious of preserving kind of these archaic models for monetization of artwork. And it's really not even that archaic. They're very modern the way we think of how people profit off of art today. So this tweet that I threw on the Jumbotron about paying a 2-year-old to draw a straight line is better than the most aesthetically pleasing AI image. I think there's some temptation for people to oppose AI in such a way that they just want to preserve the human effort of making AI, and to preserve to preserve human ways, I guess, of profiting off of their artwork. And so it's like, maybe I'm taking the stronger argument here, but I don't want to incentivize slop. There's a lot of slop out there, and it's not AI generated. So to say that we have to preserve, this vocation in such a way that that real human artists, profit off of slop, and not and that's not replaced by AI. Like, I don't have an incentive to do that. I really do not feel an incentive to do that. And if you're not an artist, if you talk to artists in general are very critical of other people's work. They like what they like, and they don't like what they don't like. And I think there's something very positive to that kind of battle, if you will, among artists that produces better stuff. So I would be maybe somewhat critical of preserving really those forms of monetization in any way that it really prevents the development of, I think, this very cool new tool that we have in AI. So here, let me throw it back to Julian with this question. I know Tim has his hand up, and I want to hear everybody's thoughts, but I want to throw it to Julian with this. Like, have you engaged at all with, like, just the weird way that the church used to incentivize, like, beautiful religious artwork through patronage, and now, like, it really doesn't, and there's just a lack of like, monetary incentive to really create some of the beautiful religious artwork that we saw in the past. Like, what are your thoughts about that?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. So basically, it's that's an economic question. Like, should we go back to maybe a medieval guild system? My inclination is yes, definitely. But yeah, we don't necessarily need some sort of guild system, but I don't know. That's a great question. At the very least, bringing it to church art, I guess. And maybe this is somewhat off your question, but it seems like when we're talking about art in an actual physical church building, I would say, at least as a rule, should be really actually handcrafted. Like, even if it's a real painting, but it's printed, it's a print of a real painting, and putting that in a church, seems wrong. It's probably technically not wrong, but at least some people are probably going to scoff at it. And likewise, obviously, if it's AI art, it's going to be printed, and at the very least, people are going to scoff at that. So just in terms of, like, the AI religious art question, I would generally be opposed to putting it in a church. Maybe in some cultures they wouldn't mind that, so maybe it's up to the prudential judgment of the local bishop or something. But at least as a general rule, I would avoid putting it in churches. But in terms of other uses of it, non sacred uses of religious AI art, I really don't see a problem with it. I mean, if someone's inspired by it, that's great. Now, my hope, kind of bring it back to another point, is that as AI art kind of saturates, everything, and even like the common man uses it more, there's hopefully will be a greater appreciation for handcrafted art, right? It'll become more of a luxury item, more exotic and everything, and thus more of a demand actually for that. And I think maybe that will possibly incline the church to invest more in that. So again, very hopeful. I don't know if that really answers your question, but those are my thoughts roughly on that.
I was just gonna say that I love that. I love like the hand paintedness, and I wanted to just say I put up in the jumbotron. There's a guy named Eric, and he does hand painted works, and he was recently commissioned to do a series on Dante's Inferno, painting it, not AI generated or anything. And it was really impressive, and they're like huge paintings, and so just like to offer something on the opposite side of the spectrum, And every time somebody talks about this, I always think about like really cheap furniture, like IKEA furniture, and then you look at like the wooden, like handcrafted furniture, like the older stuff, and that's what the metaphor that always comes to my mind.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I think we'll eventually see a backlash against AI art in the sense that people will get tired of it. And again, there'll be a big movement to just do things manually again. At least hopefully in an economic system where, people aren't scraping by and have the leisure, the free time to do such things. That's obviously a key part to making that possible.
Yeah, I in no way think that that art is going to like human artists are going to stop making art. It's just not going to happen. Like others have said, like since the dawn of time, like artists have been making art because they love it, and a lot of them have died broke. So that's not going to stop, and I think there's still a great respect that we all recognize when we see something just masterful, that evokes that awe, like it's not going to stop. And I think AI can be complementary. I know Tim has had his hand up, but I also saw that Feldman had her hand up at one point, and Feldman is an artist herself. I don't really know her full story, but I know she's really been in a variety of places, and I want to hear what she has to say. So Tim, why don't you go ahead and unmute, and then I'll throw it to Feldman.
Sure, I'll keep it brief and then give her a chance to chime in. So I love these conversations because there's different viewpoints on the same thing, and I think the same thing is art, and LLM is to add more nuance to your earlier true actually. So in a way, I would like to amend what I said about LLMs and AI being a tool. It is indeed a step change in technology. It's sort of like the internet, right? It is, or the nuclear fission, which unfortunately people associate that with war and weaponry, but nuclear power can be utilized for peaceful purposes. I used to think that you can say that technology is neither good nor evil. It's it boils down to the motivation of the people using the technology. But now I think it's a lot more nuanced than that. I think it's actually more of a Pandora's box, whereby we do not know necessarily the long-term effects of the technology. I'll give you two examples. One is the smartphones, right? And how there definitely have been very good things that came out of it. However, there have also been very unexpected, you could say bad things that came out of, the ubiquitous adoption of smartphones. So, two other things really quick is, I think it's important to understand, and I really love Jack's observation about effective nature, let's say, of AI, and because AIs are trained on human-generated data sets that are labeled and categorized and then trained iteratively millions and millions, billions and billions of times over to associate, let's say, like an image, like a cat, with the word cat, right? That's how. Anyways, I think even if you build a perfect system, if you have imperfect things, which is to say, like human input, and that then you output, right? So imperfect, even if you have a perfect black box, call it AI, you have humans inputting that data, training that AI on that data. There's going to be imperfect output. And that includes things like misinformation, disinformation, things like logical biases, as well as cognitive biases. So, it is a revolutionary thing, and I think we're all doing our best collectively to understand that. And fundamentally, art, and I'll end this here. Fundamentally, art, I think, conveys meaning, and art, just like science, right, has been and faith, I would say, has been part of the human story since the dawn of time. So, anyways, I really appreciate these sort of conversations where you have a diversity of viewpoints on things that truly matter, and that I think it's safe to say that we actually all collectively care about.
Yeah, definitely. I would make a comment about the retrospective nature of AI art. I think that's at least in some sense true about all art. Like, an artist, when, for example, making a painting, they're in some sense doing something retrospective. They're kind of bringing to mind images in their past, and they're shaped by what humans have done in their culture and whatnot. And yeah, the whole thing is like imperfect input and imperfect output. And that's, I would say, just true about all artists. Like, how the artist has been affected by previous art, seeing previous art, or, what has been said to the artist can, obviously impact the art. And, there's another point. Oh yeah, right. So, AI art, takes pre-existing art and then sort of, combines them, but it doesn't really create anything new. And I don't know. I think it technically does create something new. And, there's the phrase, of course, there's nothing new under the sun, but like, even with respect to just human things in general, like, obviously God, we can't invent something that God hasn't thought about, right? So everything we discover, and pre-exists in that way, big cosmic metaphysical way. But really, when like a person comes up with something new, they're basically combining some old ideas in a new combination, and that seems to be what AI art literally does. So, I would consider, like, maybe AI art does do something new. At least some of the images it creates seems like I haven't seen anything like that before. But anyway, that's another perspective.
Feldman, did you want to say something to speak into this? Because when I was first putting the space together, I really wanted to get some artists in here to give their perspectives. And I know you're an artist who's somewhat embraced the AI field. So, like, what are kind of your thoughts about how AI can work alongside artists?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to touch on tradition and new media and prompting, and just for clarity on my background in this field. I've been professionally engaged in the fine arts from 1990 through 2018, with little brief breaks here and there for a year or two. A thought on prompting would be, so when I prompt, and this began with music, right? For me, this, when those first started popping off, way back when, 2 years ago, feels like forever. I might suggest trying this. Instead of saying in the style of, think of the piece that it is that you're trying to emulate some aspect of, and maybe something I do is I'll ask an LLM to describe this particular piece in technical terms, and then I can play with those technical terms to really nail down technically what what kinds of impacts and effects I'm looking for. That's something to think about on prompting. Probably a lot of other people are, it's probably not very unique. As far as the nature of the, not seeing AI generated work as being original, historically, a lot of work hasn't been very original till the end. And I think a lot about this idea of the apprentices kind of painting things in and the master coming along to do the finishing work. And I think of the AI as filling, kind of filling the shoes of those workers, right? Where there's nothing saying an artist can't come in and hand embellish and illuminate those works and make them truly unique. And to that end, somebody else had mentioned something else about this. Well, to flip it around, are we trying to put new wine into old skins? I think that we will embark on artistic generation outside of these traditional forms, right? New media. This is something that we've been talking about for a couple of decades, and it seems like we still don't really have a handle on it. But I would imagine something like a DJ remixing music, something like that, but visually, where maybe you can create a really banging mix, right? And then you can just press play and walk away. And maybe there will be some kind of digital work like that. Yeah, those are my thoughts so far, I guess.
Thank you so much, Feldman. I think that's actually a great example about like hip hop was actually it's still critiqued, to be honest, which is I think somewhat of a shame. But for copying other works, and so it's not really new. But I think there's something really beautiful about the way that a lot of it really does reference and the past, and I think hip hop does that in a very visible way. Um, and I think there is with art, it's always an evolution, it's always a change, but there's always that connection to the past in the way that the past inspires new things, and then that inspires new things, and I think that's really a beautiful process. So and AI kind of exists within that framework too. Honestly, I think a lot of AI art right now is somewhat less inspiring in the way that it's totally disconnected from like social conversation. When at least when you're just letting the AI spin, it's almost like I've heard somebody remark on this before, and I thought it was a really good analogy. But it's like listening to somebody explain their dream. Like this dream has no connection to current context. It means nothing to me. It's just it's just your mind spinning, completely isolated, and art kind of takes place in a conversation between people. So that's really a big distinction, I think, in like the human element to art versus just the machine hallucinating. Um, but let's spin it around. Let me say this, JL. I don't know if you can see like other hands up. I just popped in on the desktop, and it looks like there maybe it's a bunch of hands up that I'm not seeing on my mobile app. So if I'm kind of missing the conversation, I apologize.
Yeah, no, I don't see anybody's hands up, to be honest.
Okay. Well, I did see that Will joined back. So if is he on the speaker panel?
No, I have him as a listener on my phone. I'm gonna invite him to speak right now.
Okay. Will, if you wanted to pop back where you left off, you missed a lot, but it's all right. We can we would be happy to have you come back and join the convo. But yeah, let's talk about maybe AI a little bit on the iterative process. And I did kind of pull up. I do a lot of this with my space promos. And again, like I said, I'm not like a visual artist, so I felt, maybe like I would be someone unqualified to really host this conversation too much. So I'm happy we have people like Feldman here who can maybe speak a little more to that. But I have enjoyed with the promos that I do for these spaces. I've enjoyed using AI in a kind of a complementary way to make the promos. I had an example pulled up, and maybe while I'm looking that up again, we can toss it to Will. But let me see if I can just pull it up real quick.
That one promo you had, I remember like your first rosary space. I remember you did a really good job with that. You do nice promo and nice work.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm open to critique, because like I said, I'm not. My mom was actually she graduated from the Columbus College of Art and Design, so she's big into that, but she kind of gave it up, to have kids. So unfortunately, I stole that from I stole that from her. But
Aw, you're a beautiful piece of art, Connor. It's
oh,
okay.
thank you so much. Appreciate it. Yeah, I'm not. I'm trying to find it. I'm gonna dig through my profile here, but let's not stall the conversation. Will, if you want to pop back in, I don't know how much you caught of kind of the tail end of people responding to maybe some of your concerns, but if you want to maybe pick up where you left off, you're welcome to.
But I'm quite happy just to sit and listen. I'd rather familiarize myself just for a wee bit rather than jump in and maybe run over old ground. So I can listen for a wee bit and pick up.
Yeah, one thing that I've been thinking more and more about, and someone said something to me the other day about it, but arguably AI art puts, at least currently how it's set up, available to the public. It puts the the ability to make art into the hands of the common man a little bit more. Now that can be for good or ill, but there's it's kind of stereotypical sometimes where artists are a small minority and, are seen as somewhat snobbish because they devoted their life to a skill that most people don't have, understandably. And, the put like it's kind of, I don't know, for example, analogous to watches. Watches used to be really, really expensive and just only a few people could afford them. And when watches became cheaper and available to everybody else, there was a backlash saying like, oh no, that shouldn't be right. That shouldn't be available to just anyone, right? I don't know, that maybe that's not analogous, but like in terms of one person said that when like you're creating just even a PowerPoint presentation for, a business meeting or whatever, if you don't have good images that go along with sort of the abstract ideas that you have, it's probably going to go over most people's heads. And, if you don't have the means to create engaging visuals in that, then you're going to be at a massive disadvantage, right? And so, previously that was only available to a few people who could afford to hire artists to do that. And, with AI art, now it's more available and, puts power into the hands of common people, I think, a little bit more. Maybe I'm totally off. Someone said that the other day, and I'm still thinking about that. And I think there might be a point to that.
I think there could be, I'm somewhat critical of the idea of like the democratization of it. Although I think there's good aspects to it, but I do respect kind of the role of the artist of somewhat of curating taste. I don't know if anybody is really into hip hop or knows Rick Rubin, who's a big kind of a producer, I guess, in the world. And you'll find him a lot on like TikTok and YouTube. He's kind of a funny character, but he speaks a lot to just the role of the artist as a curator and how valuable it is to really refine your taste and how much we respect great artists, not just because of the art that they create, but really that they can curate, that to curate a visual or whatever kind of art medium they're working with. They can really, hone in on that because they have very refined tastes. And so we kind of respect that in artists. But that's not critiquing totally your point there. That was just a minor
Yeah, no,
point.
that is a good point to make, and I guess it's kind of like, also, there's scholars still, even though more and more people know how to read, right? And just because more and more people know how to read doesn't mean we should get rid of scholars who are like the expert readers, as it were. But yeah, there should definitely be expert artists still, I would say, be as sort of models for the rest of us. Absolutely, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even just say that there must be, but just like there will be. Like I don't think that role is going to leave. Um, but oh, okay,
Yeah, I
yeah, go
don't
ahead.
think yeah, I don't think AI is going to turn someone into an artist any more than taking a couple of classes will, you know. Um, However, I do think that if you're struggling to communicate an idea, you know, you might not be like a grade A artist with AI, but you probably will be able to improve your communication skills greatly.
Yeah.
Maybe to kind of spin it back, and this maybe is getting a little bit more to some of Will's questions earlier. But like I just threw up on the Jumbotron. This is a promo I did for Space a little while back, and just kind of like breaking down the image I did here. And again, like I said, I'm not a visual artist. This was made in Canva, you know, so it's not really you know, it's not very deep. But just breaking down the image. There's actually a few images in here because this is kind of like how I've enjoyed approaching the promos I do. But the hands that were developed, those are totally AI. That was made in Midjourney. The coloring was different. There were elements of it that were different, but I basically cut out the hands for this promo, and then I added a few things. So in the background, it's very faint, but that is actually a it's a piece of Paradiso. It's a piece by Gustav Dole. I'm forgetting the name of the artwork, but some of you guys might know. It's it's a bunch of angels flying around. Essentially, I think an image of God who is light.
Oh,
So that
is it the sempiternal rose thing? Is that what we're talking about? I think.
no, it's actually here we go. So it's this piece. Let me show this to the Jumbotron. I don't know if anybody's seen that before. It's Gustav Dole. It's the artist. The
Yeah, that's
second
what I was
image.
thinking of. I don't know if that's what it's
Yeah,
called. Yeah,
It's the
that's
it's his engraving of the Empyrean from his
there you
engraving
go.
for the Divina Commedia.
Appreciate it from
okay.
the art historian.
Boom.
So again, scrolling back, if you can just scroll in the Jumbotron back to the one just before. And so that is Gustav Dole. We have the AI element there with the hands, and then I'm a big fan of Salvador Dali, and so that is the Saint John of the Cross, an image of Dali's that I've used. That's kind of going into the sun black hole in the hands. So you could probably question really like what is this mess that I made. But I don't know. I thought it was kind of cool, and I was following somewhat of a vision that I had in my head, and then as I was playing with it and playing with the AI, I kind of stumbled on, you know, what I had there. So this is not a perfect example of maybe how an artist might use this tool of AI, but I think, you know, I think there are ways that AI can be used in a complementary manner rather than just simply like I'm just prompting the AI and using whatever it spits out. So I don't know what maybe somebody might think on that matter, or you will, since you were questioning kind of the integrity of imagining that great classical artists are just going to be prompting AIs.
I mean, the long and short of my concern is, look, I'll put it this way, and I don't ever really speak as bluntly as this. My concern, well, it's not so much a concern as an observation that we've seen in history, right? That we've seen certain movements to do with innovations in the way that art is made. And in particular, we look at the extraordinary output of the Dadaists and the Surrealists, Tristan Tzara, Marcel Duchamp, ready-mades, found art, the objet trouvé and so on. Didn't change anything in the long run, fundamentally, about market value. And however you square it, art at large, has provenance behind it. You can't sell a picture at a gallery or at auction unless you have receipts, letters of sale, provenance. It's possible to manufacture some of that kind of stuff, which is kind of what happened with Germans who stole art in the 1930s. They fabricated it. But by the by, what I'm saying is there's still a lot of weird behavior that goes into the economic activity surrounding art. So in terms of the art world and the art market, I think that the more AI art that is produced or created and put up for sale commercially, I think the more that it happens, we'll see a rapid drop-off in price. I'm thinking about that there was some objects from that French collective which were slated to sell for €7,000, $8,000, something like this. They sold 425, nearly basically $500,000. The next one that comes along will be half that. The next one that comes along will be half that. This was all the way back in 2018, before DALL-E, before ChatGPT. This was in the rudimentary stages of commercially publicly available generative AI. The thing that concerns me most about this, religious imagery or otherwise, is that the functions or the gap in the market that image generative AI fills is not about galleries and museums and art that people are thinking about and will be wandering around when they come to London, or when they go to France, or when they go to Washington, or whithersoever it might be. It is actually really graphics. It's the issue of content where we'll see the most squeezing out of human beings. Artists aren't going to be replaced who spend their whole lives, who've got the whole prestige behind them of the pedigree, the provenance, and so on. What we're going to be seeing is things like birthday cards, comic books, little logos, website art, promotional material, sketches, preparatory outline drawings. And those people, artists and graphic designers, creators, they will be the first person to be squeezed out. Art, which involves a brush or chalk or a pencil or sculpture, will remain the same fundamentally. We don't have to. I think we're all sensible enough to recognize that nobody's going to stop painting, right? But there is a real threat in terms of business, the creation and generation of material in this kind of graphics and content space, where people do not make a huge amount of money, but they work to a high standard and they work to good lead times, and they are not going to be able to beat that. And I think, as somebody else has mentioned, yes, of course, the world moves forward. The world picks up, things change, and people have to adapt. But I don't think that we can be blind to the fact that just every time that we use AI to quickly generate a header or a promotional material. Remember the days, just some people maybe here, some people here are older than me, some people here are quite a bit younger than me. We used to get our friends to draw, draw a quick sketch, or we pay a young, somebody who was studying art or graphic design, maybe you'd buy them lunch, or, just as a favor, trading favors to get good material, for whatever you were doing and putting out there. That is going to disappear for the sake of generating something in a split second on the basis of a prompt. And that is the way that the world works moving forward. But that's the conversation that I'm interested in having, specifically on the context of Christianity. How do we moderate? Is there room for moderating or regulating this handover period? Because some people have been living hand to mouth, paycheck to paycheck on the basis of doing this kind of work. And do we need to be mindful? Is there some scheme of encouraging people who, to get behind and understanding how prompts work and how they can keep up in this market? Is that something that is, I don't know, is that a conversation that's happening? Because I think that that's the key to all of this when it comes to Christian imagery in the service of faith, right? People are going to lose their jobs. People already have lost their jobs overnight because of generative AI. Yes, it's for them to keep up. But how can we support people to get the best out of these new tools in a way that works for everybody?
Yeah, that's obviously some really good questions there. The quickest answer I could give off the cuff is that they should just jump into it. Either get like a Dolly account or a Midjourney account and just start experimenting. That'd be the quickest first step. And obviously that's very simplistic. I will say that, as in my experience in Chesterton Academy, which has sort of exploded, we have 60 or 70 other schools now. And we're a classical model, so we make students do art every year, and eventually they're doing oil painting. I think just in terms of like an educational movement, we should get people to again keep on doing handcrafted art. And I think that'll the more and more that happens, the culture will just keep appreciating that kind of art too. Um, but yeah, just definitely artists should just jump into it. It's pretty easy. It's actually pretty terrifying at first. Doing AI art at first because it's like, wow, this thing is this thing actually sentient and intelligent or whatever. But uh, that's my initial very sloppy answer. They should just start experimenting with it.
I think the best prompters are going to be the people who understand the concepts the best. Basically, these models are huge semantic maps of all the possible combinations of words connected to all the possible combinations of images. And so the people who really understand their concepts are probably going to be the best at conveying them. No matter what language they use, they'll use their unique understanding. And so that's why I think artists will have an easy time switching. But, in the short term, there is this effect of sort of that pace of creation that AI generation provides could potentially, put people out of jobs at the beginning until we sort of find out who are going to be the best people who know which concepts the best. And how do we define concepts? And I'm actually working, my kind of like side project right now is in linguistics, making huge concept maps of all languages. And these concept maps of all languages could be potentially like hooked up to AIs. And like I was mentioning before, we might have totally new use cases for AI art that's not traditional graphic design. It's not traditional advertisement art. It's not traditional museum art. It's not. It can't be painted or sculpted. And so I don't think that human touch is really going away, because our experience is basically rooted in the real world, and is happening in real time. You couldn't basically just ask someone to do a Michelangelo, or ask an artist to do or an AI to do, sorry. You couldn't ask an AI to do a Michelangelo because Michelangelo was contracted to do his specific painting at his specific time with his specific skill set, and that meaning the concepts that were expressed are a product of his entire existence. And so those concepts could not be expressed by anyone else at any different time. And arguably, in all of history, we still haven't seen AI match that level of skill in conveying those wide concepts. So I would just, basically my main point is just encouraging people to like keep an open mind, because there's a lot of open doors with this tech and ways that we don't really understand how it works yet, or how it's going to be used. But it's clearly very powerful, and so regulation of it for these short-term effects and that transition period is absolutely important. And we could have a easy time, doing it if we sort of found out how do we sort of onboard artists into the AI space. How can AI mediums, which are so different from human mediums right now, contribute to human art, or will they? And where are their niches, and where do we need to sort of encourage human creators? Because I don't know, for the purpose of a church, I personally think that, I don't know, human, like Michelangelo with his masterpiece on the dome. There's no replacement for human creators in making holy things. That's for sure, because the Holy Spirit is in us, and that's all of our experience, and that certainly cannot really be expressed except by human hands, from what I've seen.
Yeah, well, I'm really I kind of tired of like moderating the conversation so much, so I appreciate the hands and whatnot, but I think you can just like totally jump in and respond as you see fit.
Yeah,
But
yeah, of course.
if I can just a little bit, like I can kind of foresee that I don't think you're going to be, if I heard your question correctly, I don't think you're going to be entirely satisfied with kind of the response that these artists ought to just start using AI, or, risk kind of losing the wave. Although I do agree, I think it's a mistake for artists to kind of miss out on the opportunity to engage with new things, because I think art, doesn't kind of exist in this vacuum. You have to engage with the cultural conversation. So I think that's a mistake. But I really do hear what you're saying. And I don't expect, I really don't think that AI art is going to replace, painted art or these other mediums that we all appreciate. And, I threw this question at Julian, so as maybe you respond to him, maybe you can also kind of take this into account. But I think your question is really not so much, are we preserving like traditional classical art styles and efforts, but are we preserving like those monetization models of how that art is incentivized? And you, especially as an art historian, but like why is the church not a patron of the arts these days? Like why are those monetization models that are very commoditized, that are focused on not so much the artwork, but really that the purpose that the artwork serves, whether it's promoting a space, whether it's creating a header or a brand logo, like why are those monetization models really worth preserving? And especially if we're coming at this from a question of Christianity and the church, like, why are we not providing kind of those incentive models for these great artists who create in these very classical and traditional ways to continue creating it the way they do? Like, why has that fallen by the wayside?
So a brilliant question. Funnily enough, I was going to actually, I was planning to give a kind of quote unquote lecture on the one Renaissance model of patronage, which I just postponed until later in the week, taken from the life of Sigismondo Pandolfo Malatesta, who was extraordinary, weird and wonderful guy, quite evil, very famously one of the only people who's ever been quote unquote canonized to hell, which is not a thing. It's a hyperbolic expression just because he was so wicked. But this is an important question. The church does still is a major patron of music, sacred music, and less so the visual arts and less so architecture. There's been a huge change in the amount of resources that are available to the church these days. We're looking at parish churches in the UK that are that take Catholic parish churches and even Anglican churches, basically every church, apart from cathedrals, that it will take 11 years to raise money to patch a hole in their roof. And when you're doing that, it just seems a bit silly to be commissioning some bright young artist to, paint a mural behind the altar, for the same amount of money that it would cost to fix 2 holes in the roof. I think that I'm interested in getting terms defined in this conversation, because I think most of us are on the same page. I'm not hostile at all to, for example, somebody brought up something, I can't remember who it was, I don't know if it was Julian. I think this is a brilliant suggestion, which is that generative AI in terms of images, images have an enormous use application in terms of generating plans, inspiration, outlines, for people then to say, okay, I'm going to drum up this or sketch up or mock up some models of what I'm actually going to do and sit down and paint myself. But what we're seeing writ large at the moment, when we look at it very carefully and sensibly, is we're going to very quickly reach a stage where everything that a graphic artist can do, and that's really what we're talking about here. I know that it's images, but let's just call it visual content rather than fine art, right? Some people are not comfortable with making those distinctions, but I've already set out my position as far as basically the prevailing opinion, which is that, first of all, photography doesn't belong to art history in the same way. It's not art in the same way that painting, sculpture, drawing, and architecture are. And even more so, I don't think any AI art would really would be considered in the same way. It's part of visual culture. But what we're really talking about here are certain commercial applications of generating images for particular purposes. We're talking about comic books and greetings cards, all the things that are about like promo, images, content headers, place fillers, all of these things that we see very often. Use Grok, just generate a quick image to promote, or tack onto your tweet or whatever. What we're going to see is a huge expansion. We're already seeing it, a huge expansion in the interest of the applications of this, because look, Grok is, if you have, X Premium Plus or whatever it is, it's basically included in that, with no cap on how much you can use it. And it's pretty good. It's actually pretty, like, the quality of the images are staggeringly good. But what we're going to see is that people will get so used to using this, and when the public at large upskill in learning how to use prompts, which has happened very quickly, just looking at the text, for like ChatGPT and things. First of all, people are learning how to use prompts as ordinary, everyday people. And then, whichever way you look at it, you don't need to be an art, you don't need to be an art, you just need, most of these images, this group of images, this group of graphics that we're referring to, are not really judged for their quality. They just have to be good enough. And they're really content in the sense that they're filler material very often. And when we push forward to a point where it's so rapidly available in the hands of a consumer, we will see a collapse we'll see an entire sector disappear. Now, this is a kind of inevitability. This is going to happen left, right, and center all over the world, all over the shop. But what are people's attitudes or opinions as to how quickly that happens? And what happens when something goes wrong? And here's where I'll land my plane. When we're talking about artists and artists, classically trained, or let's just say, traditionally trained artists, hands, incarnational, whatever they're doing, whether they make pots or whatever they might do, sketches, digital, watercolors, inks, lithographs, whatever. Um, if I want to have a piece of fish for supper, I can go and buy a piece of fish, right? But then at the same time, some people very much enjoy the process of going to fish themselves. I don't know if anybody's gone shooting or hunting, but, there is something about the process of doing it yourself. And there are some people who are very keenly formed eyes, keenly formed hands, who are never, ever, ever going to countenance the idea of sitting at a keyboard and typing in a set of prompts, because they would far rather, to use this allegory, they'd far rather be sitting in a boat on the lakeside, fishing all day and catching nothing, than than just having a fish put in front of them, or having a fish that they could sell to somebody. And I think that this is an important thing to remember, that there's a very incarnational human principle that adds value, and we've seen this time and time and time again. Final point. In Florence, for example, I used to walk all the way down the River Arno, buy coffee for €1. I'd walk past the statue of Michelangelo's David outside of the Palazzo Vecchio. It's a replica. And you'd see people taking their photographs outside of it, but then you'd also see them later that day paying like €25 to go and see the real thing. And at the Academia, the museum where the real thing is, people make a distinction between what is fake, quote unquote, and what is real. And this is a really weird phenomenon in the way that the art market works, that authenticity counts for something, because you can make a print of a Piero della Francesca, you can make a print of a Michelangelo, but people will still pay for the real thing. We can 3D print at this point in time an exact replica right down to the brushstrokes of of like Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. Well, okay, the first one's going to be interesting because of the prestige of the technical feat of 3D printing the oils to the point that it's indistinguishable, right? But authenticity still is this weird thing in art. It's not just about the quality of the finished product, but people want the real shilling. And I think that that's something that we can't overlook in this whole situation. Yeah, it's going to be exciting. Yeah, it's going to be convenient. But then interest is going to die down. And in between those two events, all of a sudden people won't be going to study graphic design. They won't be studying to sketch. They won't be studying architectural drawing because there's no money in it. There won't be any money in it for like a period of 10 years or something. And then the interest in this generated stuff will die down. And then there'll be no humans who are trained or sufficiently skilled to do the real thing again. Right? And we'll go around in cycles like this, which is what happened in the Industrial Revolution. So authenticity counts for something, and it's a very weird factor in the way that people consume art and visual culture. And I don't think we can ignore that.
Yeah, I agree with a ton of that. And I've actually, your point about the fishing is something that I've thought about, that in some sense, handcrafted art is analogously like wilderness survival, and AI art is more like the modern conveniences that allow us to survive now, roughly speaking, obviously. Now, if you're surviving because of all these modern conveniences, you do lose touch with nature, and that's not good. That could have psychological impact. We are obviously natural creatures, and so even though the modern conveniences aren't bad, it's still good to have one foot in nature, and to basically know at least some basics of how to survive out in nature. It gives us a sense of peace, because all this modern world might collapse, and that gives us some anxiety at the very least, oftentimes. And so likewise, AI art, I think, was going to go out of style eventually in some form or another. And if there's not enough people who have, analogously speaking, kept up their wilderness survival skills, it's a lost art that we'll have to rediscover. So that's why I advocate, us continuing to do and know how to do handcrafted art. But also to engage this new technology as well, and ideally have a balance between the two.
I think that observation about connecting back to nature is actually really interesting. Marshall McLuhan talks about mediums, and when any medium is pushed to its limit, it basically reverses on itself in the complete opposite is brought into the world. And it might just be seen now with all digital media, like we're kind of at the end of digital, right? I mean, because now every kind of image, every kind of movie, every kind of song is everything all at once, to the point that it basically means nothing. We're going to realize the fact that we're just looking at a big chunk of plastic. That's really all we're doing, because all of the specific images are just kind of all going to blend together. So I do think that the end of AI might end up reconnecting people with the real world. Maybe that's where the new art forms are going to actually emerge.
Yeah, I feel that's eventually going to happen too, and it's very paradoxical, which probably indicates that it's true.
And the thing,
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Will.
and the thing, and I actually don't have too much experience of the image side of things. Funnily enough, but I can speak to the way that it's what we're seeing in writing at the moment. I had an interview last year to take on some regular work as to just expanding some script editing work for in the screen industry for films and for movies and television, which I do not there anymore. But as part of the process, I had to read through and review a batch of scripts in a very short space of time, and unbeknownst to me, three of them had been generated using I can't remember which version of ChatGPT it was at the time, but using generative AI. And I didn't know this, but I was asked, okay, give us your coverage on this. And I identified the three scripts that had been written and produced using like very, very, very high quality, like not commercially available, generative AI, which I just said, I can't help but say this. I think that these scripts have been, written using AI. And for us, as interestingly enough as well, in the other half of my life, all this concern about people writing essays with generative AI, it only works if you're asking it to write about something that there's a lot of material available for. If you're asking it to write about Catcher in the Rye or The Handmaid's Tale or the Laffer curve or economic principles or fiscal drag or whatever it might be, then yeah, it's all there online. But if you're asking it about something that's original, we're not there yet, right? And a lot of these pushes, a lot of these questions are, well, we're going to have to digitize and increase all of these systems and structures to gear towards AI doing eventually everything that it might do, ought to, could do, should do. At the meantime, we are de-skilling human beings fundamentally, and we need to be, by all means, recognizing that we need to be technologically and digitally literate. But at the same time, there are raw critical reasoning skills, especially in academia, in scholarship, in thinking, in research and productivity, that are outside of the field of the digital sphere. And then also in the writing world as well, creativity, networking, refining, editorial skills, the if they were developed and honed alongside digital literacy and understanding how to prompt and all this kind of stuff, then we'd end up with a very highly cultivated, like finely tuned machine. I'm not averse to the use of AI to help productivity. I see many, many, many brilliant applications and uses of AI as a partner, as kind of like a lazy Susan, a dumb waiter, alongside all these other things that humans are doing. But I think that there's a lot of discussion at the moment, which is being directed towards gearing the world for the capabilities of AI at the expense of investing in exploring and developing the capabilities of human persons in this extraordinary world when we have access to all of these informations and technologies. So I think it's an interesting coefficient there that has to be balanced.
Yeah, I agree. And as a teacher, I've definitely been seeing more and more plagiarism with AI in essays and whatnot. So even if people are against AI, I encourage people to use AI so that you can recognize it when it's being used, especially if you're a teacher. But yeah.
The problem is the teachers are using AI to grade all the work. So the students are doing fake work and the teachers are doing fake grading.
I'm not doing that yet, but yeah, it's tempting.
I'm not gonna prematurely end the space, but I will say we've been running about over 2 hours now. This is one of the longest spaces I've hosted, which I think speaks to how interesting the conversation is. We might have to carry it on further, maybe with another space at some point. But I do just want to kind of mention the clock and also that I lost my co-host. So maybe we start to kind of wrap it up here. But I don't know if somebody really had something on their mind they wanted to jump in and respond to. I'm happy to kind of pass it around the panel. Maybe one last time here. Go ahead, Will.
I'm also just going to bounce because it's very late here. But on the subject of education and the future of what our world looks like, Diana and I will be hosting our second Catholic Vote Space tomorrow evening, and on the subject of education, the famed Jeremy Tate of the classical, the great Renaissance and classical learning among homeschoolers, will be speaking with us alongside Alexis Walkenstein, who's a big movie producer, and Bree Dale from the Daily Wire, and a couple of other people whose names don't spring to mind right this second, not because they're unimportant, but because there are so many brilliant people, and you would all be most welcome to come along to that. And this has been a treat. I'll just sit back and listen as you guys wrap up. But thank you so much, Connor, and to everybody else, Julian, Jack, Naomi, Ian, and BA, and a couple of people who've left as well. This has been a treat.
Thank you, Will.
Thank you so much, Will. Jeremy Tate, a relation of Andrew Tate. Some of you might know.
No.
Okay.
Stop.
All right. I think Jack threw his hand up for a second, but I don't know if you wanted to give some last words there.
No, I just thanks for putting this. I was just applauding what you were saying. Thanks for putting this space together.
Yeah, awesome. I appreciate. I might want to do a space on Moshe McLuhan at some point. I don't know if everybody's actually familiar with. Well, some people might be familiar with his work, but I don't know if everybody is familiar with his religious life. I think he was, somewhat. He kind of kept that somewhat to himself. I think it kind of came out in later years. His deep Catholicism. And also he has a connection to Teilhard de Chardin, who is somebody we bring up here in a number of spaces that I think I might like to invite actually Ian Wyatt back to speak a little bit about. It's an interesting figure there in the Christian futurism conversation. So I'm kind of more interested to engage with some of these thinkers in the future.
I was really hoping someone was going to show up and try to defend this premise that paying a 2-year-old to draw a straight line is better than the most aesthetically pleasing AI. I mean, that is, Julian was getting at this, that's kind of the premise of a lot of the attacks on AI art that we hear, and it's not at all evident where it comes from, like what the source of it is historically or psychologically, philosophically. At some point, I'd love to hear, if we can't get anyone to show up and defend that position, maybe some further speculation as to where that comes from so we can address it.
Well, if I could just say quickly that I think that it sounds kind of hyperbole, but the effect, you can relate it to the macaroni owl on the fridge situation. So Granny, I've just made a macaroni owl at kindergarten. You put it on the fridge, and it's ugly, it's vile, it's awful. But there is sentimental value embedded in the fact that it's made by somebody that you know and you love and you care about, and you understand that if you wouldn't just buy a macaroni owl, glued onto a piece of paper and stick it on your fridge, right? There are all sorts of these weird things that happen in terms of value judgments in the way that we look at created things, and it threads into this authenticity thing. Would you, if you had a choice between a perfectly straight line drawn or produced through generative AI versus one that had been drawn that was wonky and irregular by your grandchild, or your child or your niece or your nephew or whomever, you know which one you'd choose if you were in the market for buying, just a drawing of a straight line, right? But there are deeper conversations, Ian, which I understand that there's a lot of straw manning around that particular question that we're seeing a lot. There's more
Well,
that we
in
need
this
more
case, the
scaffolding.
analogy is my grandchild hand drawing a straight line, or my grandchild designing a prompt to have Midjourney create a line. I suppose the analogy that we're pressing it at this point, it's a little difficult. But certainly to take the owl example, right? Would I value an owl created by a prompt designed by my grandchild maybe somewhat more than my grandchild physically drawing with a pencil an owl, potentially.
Is that
It
but
seems like a
that
realm
but is
possibility.
that is in that situation? That's kind of very, yeah. I mean that the we're there is enough here to have a conversation about this at another time, really, on the development of aesthetics after Cezanne, basically, because um, it is if they were both identical, basically, if the macaroni owl or the line or whatever it might be, if they're both identical, are you vesting value in the process? Or the technical digital awareness to whatever it might be to generate something like that, or 3D print it, or is that a novelty against creating something entirely by hand? Is this an objective judgment, and would that be true in all cases? So, but there's enough there, Ian. That's a fascinating question. There's enough there. We'll pick up on that in another space. Let's hook up and discuss that.
Yeah, so I have to leave in just a couple minutes here, so I'll make my closing comments. So first of all, thank you for having me on. This is very fascinating. A lot of great material that I have to think about. But yeah, my closing statements is I think I have a balanced view that I want to promote. So don't condemn AI completely. I wouldn't don't embrace it, in every aspect of your life, obviously, but stay in connection with nature, stay in connection with handcrafted arts. But at the same time, I do encourage good people, especially good artists, to use AI art, because if only bad people are using it for evil, then it might end the world. It might be the apocalypse, as we all sort of fear, the robots and all that. That would be my closing remarks.
Awesome. Appreciate it so much, Julian. Thanks for joining and really kind of starting this space off, giving us the thought to have the conversation. This has been a really good one, and it's gone really long.